there's this conversation of when you do family programs, are you dumbing down information? And I think it's something that as museum practitioners, we need to really think about what that means. And I often say, well, it's not dumbing down when our jobs are to create relevance and to create resonance with our families. And so if we start from the place of what is it that families are curious about, what are the questions that each member of that family has about a particular area, content, whatever it is that your museum is about. And once you figure that out, then how do you tap into that wealth of unique content, authentic content, and match that up with what's truly going to create relevance for a family? And I think if we think of it that way, we're no longer dumbing down, but rather we're tapping into the incredible expertise that we all have as institutions, and we're bringing that in deep connection with our audience.
So it's series of very important points there. And I think also we really need to address what is it that museums do best. And when you're thinking about dumbing down, what's the nature of learning in an informal setting? So that this is not, as I do believe many people still kind of expect, is that it's kind of the textbook on the walls. We'll look at the object, we'll read the label, we'll walk away with a lot of new information. And I think we do that well. That's part of what we do, but we do some other things much better. And much of the research that has been explored, probably more in science learning. That's a whole different bag, but there's always been money for that research. But it still applies across the board to subject matter, is that what the encounter of a museum experience can do is create a sense of wonder. And what it can do is create a disposition to learn. So that one of the things that we do best and really should be building on, it's not a question of dumbing it down. It's creating that sense of kind of awe and real excitement that suddenly there's an interest in a topic that may have not been there before. And what we also do is, using the real thing, is we illustrate for and involve people in understanding, how do you do this learning from objects? You know, how is it that the scientist or the historian has learned this information? There's a lot of process that goes into kind of learning in an informal setting that's very different from the much more formal kind of learning. And why not think of ourselves as partners with formal education, so that we focus on what we do best and bring it together with what may happen best in more of a classroom kind of setting.
You know, another misconception I feel folks can have about family engagement is that it's not connected to the real work of the museum, or it's kind of those games that are layered on top of the real history or the real art or the real science. And that's where I say we, though, have a job to be very rigorous as those who are developing the family initiatives, that they are truly grounded in that content, that they're grounded in the collection, that they're grounded in the historical record or the creative process behind a particular object. And I think we need to really develop those skills in our staff. We need to raise the bar in terms of how our educators think about developing family programs. But I think when it's grounded in that deep content and collection and connection to the collection, then it is the work of the museum in many ways. Just recently I got an email from one of our curators who has a 18-month-old, or maybe she's 2 years now. And it was the most fabulous email. She said, you know, Heather, I've worked here for 7 years. I just, brought my little one to the museum. I knew what you guys did was great, but I didn't understand how great it was. And it was so connected to exactly what was on view that she just all of a sudden, you know, her eyes were opened and she saw that it was really the same kind of work that she as a curator is engaged in as well.
Two things that just came to mind with that and that I think are very important is that one is about seeing our institution as an ongoing resource for learning. And so that when you've done that and you've grounded it in the collections and in the exhibit content so that and you've made it accessible, that it's actually what happens in family programs is that it opens up these collections to their investigation. And suddenly that idea of resource is much wider. I mean, we used to talk a lot, I think my experience at IMLS, I, with great wonder, discovered the fact that libraries talked about the people coming to them as users. And we still talk about visitors and guests. And I used to think about the difference in what those two terms really suggested. Librarians have always understood that their job was to facilitate the learning experience and search of the individual requests of those who were coming to them. So if I was writing the term paper or my child wanted a book on pirates, the librarian's job was to be that kind of human Google who connected within the library the resources and that individual kind of quest. And I thought about that a lot in terms of what we do in museums and thought how often we just lay the table with we've selected the menu for you. And we're not talking a menu of variety. We've done the appetizer and the dessert and everything in between. We've laid it out for you to consume. But we haven't actually been particularly responsive to the needs that you bring in. So that when you are teaching, this opportunity to use the resources, to understand the collection, to understand how to learn from it, you are actually opening up that potential far more for those that you're serving. And I love the fact that within the family, the kids are going to learn from the beginning of what a cool place we are, but also that this is this kind of very fluid and very responsive environment in which they can learn. So I do think that that's very important. And the second point that I wanted to make, and again is right out of what you're saying here, is that when you think about how people learn in museums, and we're doing a lot in the family learning with interactivity. I am reminded of, and I won't have the quote accurate, but the point that was being made was no interactive is necessary or should ever be used unless it drives the story forward. And that kind of experience of being in a museum where sometimes there is this thought that if we give them more hands-on, they'll have more fun, and how important it is to make sure that hands-on actually connects to the story, adds something to it. I do a lot of work with designers, and in the process I see designers knowledgeable about the fact that people want many ways to engage in a museum setting, but frequently have designed an activity or a movable part simply to say, kids like to touch, so they can all touch this. And I have to keep going back with that question. And what do they learn and how do they take it forward? So I think that one of the powerful things about this approach to family learning, family engagement, is that designing for that taking forward is a part of the motivation up front. Kind of sets a standard for others.